Hello, everyone, and welcome to the St. Louis Art Museum's Art Speaks program. My name is Jessica Kennedy, and I'm the educator for adult learning at the museum. Before we begin, please familiarize yourself with the Q&A section located on your screen. Feel free to enter your questions at any time during the program, and we will choose a few to answer at the end. Also, there is live auto transcription available for this program. Please click the CC icon to activate or deactivate the subtitles. For today's talk, Reframing Weimar's New Woman and Modern Life in the Metropolis, we are joined by Cait Lore, Cinema St. Louis film educator and festival programmer and film instructor at Webster University. In addition to those roles, she is also on the visitor and membership services staff at the museum. Thanks for being here today, Cait.
Hey guys, hey, so thanks for joining me. And as Jessica introduced, my name's Cait Lore. I am a film academic and researcher. I usually specialize in 70s liberation films, queer film history, as well as silent cinema. But and I usually lecture on these things maybe at WashU, Webster, the film series at Webster in particular. So you may have seen me there, but also like Jessica said, I spend a lot of my time in the galleries at the museum as someone who is gallery facing and customer facing or patron facing in my line of work. So it's all these different kinds of work, though, that informs the way I experience the museum's galleries. And my academic background, specifically my interest in cultural histories and looking at the way we construct narratives around history, that's really what kind of grounds my interpretation of these galleries and my general suspicion of the notion of progress, which we'll get into. Maybe that should signal that you shouldn't trust me because I don't believe in progress, but it's not as cynical as it sounds, I promise. Yeah, so I was hoping to, before we really get into the primary like the meat of my talk, which is going to be Weimar Germany and how modernism and modernity shaped lives there, in particular, how that hung on the German new woman, this newly modernized identity, and how it's represented in the galleries in the museum or across modernist collections, or collections of art and film from that period. So quick pause. What do I mean? Oh, sorry. What do I mean by modernism? Well, first we probably need to start with modern, which is, colloquial term, like really you could say, or I would say I'm a modern woman in the way someone might say they have a modern car. It's like a value judgment, right? It's something that signals that this is on the cutting edge of the new, almost inconceivably new. Yeah, so that's modern. Now, modernism is this broad era, okay? And it's like, it's historical and philosophical in like how it's used. And we're looking at anything from the mid 1800s all the way into like the emergence of abstract art in the 60s. That's kind of like a 100-year timeline, basically. So it's a really big era. And I don't know, some people, when they talk about it, because modernism affected so many things like painting, sculpture, prose, poetry, music, dance, science, psychology, people will talk about multiple modernisms occurring across the world and across fields. You see this a lot in academics, but I really don't like that. And I don't think you should either, because Virginia Woolf doesn't like it. And there's a great quote from Virginia Woolf where she said, and on or around December 1910, human character changed. This is something she wrote in a public essay. And so she said, I am not saying that when one went out, as one might into the garden, and there saw that a rose had flowered or a hen had laid an egg, the change was not sudden and definite like that, but a change there was nevertheless. So she's putting it on December 1910 to be kind of hyperbolic. That's also, but she's responding to someone who criticized her work, saying it wasn't real, it wasn't in that tradition of realism, and as a result, this person felt there was nothing to gain from that. And she's saying, well, maybe reality has changed. Maybe human nature has changed. So yeah, that kind of gives you a sense of why we don't want to say multiple modernisms, because modernism is a condition of the culture that seeps into every aspect of it. It's not the art object, it's what motivates that art object into being or what animates it. That answer is going to be different for every creator within modernism, but the structures weighing on them, generally speaking, are going to be pretty similar, which what unifies modernism. Now, modernity, the other M word in this title. So modernity is like ground zero for modernism. Modernity is what's happening when Virginia Woolf is writing, and she's like explicitly addressing modernism. So by 1910, like modernism is already like a term people know, and really they're talking about modernity. That you can't know that though when you're in the moment, in the ground zero, in the reckoning of modernism, because it's happening around you, right? So they would say modernism, not modernity. Anyway, modernity. What else do we want to say about that before we move forward? Oh yeah, so that also signifies, so modernity also is going to like signify the dawn of capitalism, industrialized labor, and the division of labor with that comes with industry too. So like people are going to have different kinds of jobs, and time's going to run different to get them to those jobs because products have to be turned out through the help of machines or whatever line of work they're doing. But yeah, what's interesting too about this whole theme of like a global capitalism emerging through industry's footprint and through capitalism's footprint on the world, you have a lot of essays also coming out around 1910, like Adorno and Horkheimer. They're two very famous German academics. They introduced this concept of the culture industry, which is an idea of saying that culture is imposed through industry, through the government, through capitalism. It doesn't rise naturally out of the masses. Now, you don't have to believe that. I'm not asking you to tell me if you believe that, but we're thinking about how they're thinking about culture. And that's a big deal to start talking about it as a commodity. But also at this time, because industry, big word here, you know, in terms of like what that means for society, we have like cities as you know them emerging for the first time. Look at these two photos. The photo on the right here, you see a trolley car, you see a clock in the middle, you see women and men walking on the streets together. Like this, it looks kind of like, I mean, like obviously computers have happened, it's different now, but it looks like what you think of when you think of a big city, like cars everywhere, lots of people walking. Yeah, so now think too, what kinds of structures are emerging that maybe weren't there 20 years ago. Okay, so like 1889, moving back a little bit from that 1910 date, 1889, that's like when the Eiffel Tower was constructed, okay? And around that same time, you'd have like the Statue of Liberty, these like really tall monuments that are made through modern engineering. And they're like these spectacles. Like imagine if you are one of those people, this is Germany, this is from Berlin Symphony of a Great City, but pretend this is Paris for a moment, just work with me. And it's you know, 1910, 1915, by that time, Eiffel Tower would have been like a heavily trafficked like tourist destination. And you are now climbing up this giant building that with through a system of like pulleys and levers that like kind of make an elevator happen for you. And there's steps, like I think there's over like 6,000 steps. Like you get to the top of this thing and you would look down as a citizen who would probably their parents could never look from this high of a vantage voice on an urban development like this in this way. Through a man-made development, not through like a mountain or something. Like they're looking down, they see all these people and they look like little grains of rice, right? They see women in the streets walking alone, that's new. They see men checking their watch, again, time running their life. They have to go catch that trolley. They have to get to their shift and punch in. Like these things are new, okay? So like, it's like, wow, you see all these people, they're going about your day. And you might think when you're standing at the top of the Eiffel Tower and you're like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. You might think, I'm just a tiny speck, you know, I'm just a little grain of rice. And that's another aspect of modernity, is grappling with the self and in relationship to the other, in the relationship to society. Freud is coming out of this period. Psychoanalytics is coming out of this period. This is also the birthplace of my field, right? A lot of academics, a lot of art theory was really coming in the fore, in Weimar in particular. So Germany in particular is a sacred space for academics in that way. But I mean, all of this stuff like is kicking off. So Yeah, let's look then at these two images a little more closely. Okay, so Berlin Symphony of a Great City. That's 1927. All right, a little bit later than 1910. Now we're kind of in the meat of the talk here in the timeline. We're looking from the 20s to the 30s at this point. And Berlin Symphony of a Great City is a style of documentary that was coming out. It's kind of like a creative or experimental documentary. It's not the way you think of it. It's a lot of like people running around with these cameras, and cameras are super interesting, right? Because they're machines and people are using them to document the rise of machines. That's what I love about silent film. It's like the machine documenting itself. But also they're playing with it. They're figuring out, they're fighting against the camera to get it to work. Technology and humans are kind of like trying to meet each other in this film. And it's like, this is just about getting the sense of the rhythm of the time and how it feels, like how consciousness might rise out of that. Consciousness is shifting. Like, look at that left image there. You have it split, it's destabilized. This is a big phrase. Like, destabilize is a big phrase, topsy-turvy. You'll see that everywhere in German academic writing, in German, obviously. But like talking about the destabilizing of the culture due to all this newness and all this upheaval of old systems. So let's talk a little bit more directly about the Weimar Republic, all right? So now we're going back in time again. We're sliding all around. Time's a construct. It's made up. So is history. God, why am I doing this talk? I don't believe in anything. So at the end of World War I, a group of German sailors and dock workers sparked a mutiny that resulted in the country's monarch, Wilhelm II, being overthrown. So the future of Germany was grasped by these political idealists that wanted to create the most liberal democratic system the West had seen. And they kind of did that. Like, true to their word, their constitution was incredibly freeing. Like, Germans, this is like, okay, 1919, 1918, when those constitutions like kicking off, like right at the end of World War I, like Germans are getting the right to vote. They are getting the right to have property. They're getting the right to work. And these are all Germans, regardless of class, regardless, it says it explicitly. So women as well, radically have different lives. Like, all of a sudden, you see them working in the streets alongside of men, and being able to make money and choose not to marry. We'll come back to that. But yeah, so all of this freedom. Oh, and censorship laws. That's why we have this auto dix here. Like, it's super graphic. Like, this is another reason why the Weimar scene was so robust, was artists had so much freedom to just do whatever. Like, so yeah, really grotesque image. You gotta love it. You gotta love Germany. They're nothing if not confrontational. And so, yeah, the other aspect to all this freedom and progress, though, is that Germany is coming out of a war that they kind of were humiliated by. Well, depending on how you felt about your country, you may have been humiliated by it. So they basically drew the short end of the stick. They owned so much money to everyone because, you know, they had a large part to do with the war. But as a result, there was like major political instability, violence, and economic suffering. Like, they didn't even like, it wasn't even possible for them to repay the debt. Like, it was so high, the sum. And as a result, you know, it's just, nothing could really advance. They were like kind of set up to fail by the conditions of World War I. And that's what Weimar Republic is really a short time. We're talking about 15 years. So yeah, it's a very strange era. And gosh, it's so interesting to me, but obviously. So yeah, you have all this instability and the perils of 1920, like with no leadership, no footing. Germany's trying to rebuild its confidence in itself and rebuild its identity. You can see how, like, if they went through like 15 chancellors in this period, like 15 and 15 years, you can see how someone like Hitler would show up and unify and slip right in there. And like, it's weird. So, oh, and before I skip over, our unnerving city, this is a great one. So Branch was a Dadaist, a woman Dadaist in here. I'm not going to really investigate it all that much, but you have a lot of these sites of modernity that are fascinating her, like a car in the corner, a modern woman, look at this dancer. You have like kind of a sense of a global world here, airplanes, like all these different kinds of transportation, and it's all just like thrown at you. Anyway, the German new woman, we're gonna jump on over to that. So here we are, we're in this culture, it's the 20s. Film has taken off pretty radically because Germany they were able to get a lot of money through government funding, I think, for the film scene, and they could do whatever. So you had a lot of artists coming in, making films there, like German silent film, assuming you don't know much about it, okay? German silent film is like French Impressionism in my field. Like, it's like everybody covers it, everybody talks about it, you have to talk about it, it's the biggest thing. So yeah, but also, you know, French film is like that in the 60s, but beside the point. So women's liberation, let's talk about this new political equality they have. So in the Republic, women, before that Constitution came out, they were able to attend universities even in 1908. So there was a level of education, and the war's going on, right? So before the war ends, they also are doing a lot of labor. Like, they're already in this new role. We know this from American history as well, right? A lot of women stepped out of their traditional roles as mothers and kind of became workers. So this is true for Germany. But as a result too of losing the war and this new constitution and all of these new freedoms, a new woman emerged that was already like bubbling beneath the surface in 1900. But she cuts her hair short, just like her dresses. She definitely smokes cigarettes, probably a pipe, like playing with menswear, playing with things associated with men, very popular in this time. Some of these women would like, well, if you see here, you have Anita Berber on the side, dressed here in a tuxedo. This was super in vogue. I think Marlene Dietrich was like the big one to kick it off, or maybe the most famous of someone wearing a suit. But, and you might know this woman from the Otto Dix painting of her, where she's in that big red dress or tight red dress, the opposite of big. And yeah, it's the dancer. Very, very different presentation, but also kind of two different images. I wish I had that image on here, but like the duality of the German new woman. She's in a suit, or she's like confronting you with her sexuality here, like Louise Brooks on the left in Pandora's Box. Very like the femme side of this liberated archetype. Yeah, but that's also a thing here, archetype. This is a fantasy, okay? It's, well, part fantasy, part social reality. And there's whole schools of academic thought debating what percentage of it is a fantasy. And like, you know, that's kind of silly to me, that's pedantic, but we're gonna have to talk about that a little bit, I suppose. So to me, this is like, regardless of whether or not we had people walking around in suits all the time like this, or this like hypersexual vamp woman like Louise Brooks here, which again, we'll explore an example of this in the next slide. This was a very real social reality. You can't change the fact that these laws happened. You can't change the fact the style of dress was in fashion. Like, you can't, like, these things were verifiable. And the German new woman was something known at the time. They knew what that was, like a hipster or something. Like, there's no like real hipster, but people are associated with that kind of archetype. Anyway, here's where things get maybe interesting or just really predictable, depending on how you feel or what you know about women's history. So in this turbulent economic, political, and social chaos of the Weimar Germany, guess who got blamed for all the instability? Anyone that would be other, usually women. In the case of the German new woman, absolutely. And oftentimes minorities, queer men. The whole idea of a dandy comes out of like the urban, like feminized culture in their perspective. So there's a lot of like mass cultures being feminized by like traditional gender roles being uprooted by all of this. Yeah, there was like this right-wing myth actually going around the time that was like, oh gosh, I cannot say this German word. It's impossible for me. Dolch. So it means stab in the back. So it's the legend of stab in the back. So this story is like, or the legend really is like, World War I was not, the Imperial Germany was not humbled by World War I, but was humbled instead by women, socialists, Jews, homosexuals, and others. Like, that was like a really common narrative that was touted out to raise interest in the Nazi Party, to also just find somebody to say, hey, here's my solution. Like, nobody else can make this work. Let's just blame these people. You know, we've seen this happen like recently. I don't believe in progress, or maybe you're starting to see what I'm saying here. I hope not, because it's not fun. All right, so Yeah, let's go to this last slide. Okay, so Marlene Dietrich as Lola on our left here. We have, she's in the film The Blue Angel, 1930. The real, like, this year's like a big climax for Weimar, okay? It's going to crumble very soon, but aesthetically, it's a climax like of everything. Like this film is in one part, like if you've seen Metropolis, maybe you have, if you're at this talk, that's a very popular silent film. I think The Blue Angel is like the book, like that is one end of modernity as it happened to Weimar Germany. And The Blue Angel is like the other end. And throughout it, you have references to all these different art movements. You have references to the film scene as well. But the story of it, I should probably just get into that for you first. So Marlene Dietrich here on the right, she's also a very famous American actress. This would come later. She would, right after this comes out, actually, she goes over to Hollywood and has a huge career. But here in her home country, she's doing the last breath of Weimar in this film. So depending on how you read it, the politics are troubling or surprisingly radical. I'm not going to get too much into the readings though, because you've probably not seen it. But here is the kind of gist of what's going on. Her co-star is Emil Jannings, and let's jump back here. He's this guy right here in the white tunic. He's often, this film Variety, it's a couple of years previous, is a similar plot line. And he's playing like the typical German man in this movie, like the most German man, this character that according to some, artists, intellectuals, people in power, some people think this character is being attacked or destroyed, and that by women. See this femme fatale like figure here, this new woman showing off her sexuality, seducing him, and this is supposed to like stupefy him into a trance. And again, that happens here. So this time it's Marlene Dietrich. She's a burlesque dancer and he's a professor, and he kind of becomes seduced by her character Lola while claiming that she's for uneducated rabble. This is the uneducated, this is low culture. And he ends up though being again kind of swept away by the spectacle, because spectacle is like code for like lowbrow culture, right? But like high popularity. People are being transfixed by it, they're being stupefied, they're not thinking. He's losing the logical German man mind and he's falling down in this. He becomes a clown, literally, he becomes a clown for her burlesque show and starts peddling around photos of her in between acts. So it's the fall from this man, from this high point of bourgeois society to this like dysfunctional, like erotic sex pervert. So that's really also one of the main narratives, as I said, in Variety. It's a very similar plot line that plays out. Yeah, and this theme of cuckolding, in which, a man married has a wife that humiliates him by sleeping around, is a major theme, is a major way to talk about that alt-right myth, or did I say alt-right? Whoops, Freudian slip, but that new right, it was a new right for Germany movement. Yeah, it plugged right into their narrative of this humiliating defeat at the feet of women, and so I really think you can see quite obviously here on the right, this Valentine Tessier portrait by Max Beckmann. We're having a very similar thing happen. Now, I don't know if you know this sign here. The plaque at the museum goes into it a little bit, but it's actually here, the horns of the cuckold, okay? So the horns of the cuckold was a phrase that became popular during this time as well. In that film Variety, right here again in the center, there's a whole sequence where they charge with the horns at each other, the man that's sleeping with his wife and him, and he loses to him. And there again, that was, what year was that again? Yeah, 20, oh, that was, I don't have it in here. It was, 1925. So then by 30, we've got this repeat of that storyline. And then we have Valentine Tessier doing it, because in France at the same time, Tessier is doing a very similar story of a cuckolding myth in which a woman sleeps with Jupiter, to then birth Hercules secretly. I think that's the general plotline of it. It's really hard to find this play that she's in its English translation, but essentially it's another cuckolding play that's like kind of dressed up like a Greek myth. Yeah, so I don't want you to think that I'm saying that Max Beckmann is a big old sexist because he painted this and he's promoting these alternative ideas about women. I keep wanting to say alt-right because it's so relevant. Cuckolding is even a common phrase now, but it's like come back into popular culture again. It's a way of emasculating and saying that the real man is gone, but, you know, or the real men are gone in this country, ruined by, you know, women in power or whatever. But I should note, Beckmann, he's a very complicated figure. He would say all the time, like in 1938, I'm looking at this quote in my notes here. He says, "I would like to emphasize that I've never been politically active in any way." He says that a lot, like a lot. And it's like, how can you say that when literally all of your art is about the cultural moment? Like, also he's 50 in 1938. Okay, he's 50. Like, there's a part of me too that's just like, when I did the math, I was like, this guy was 50? Like, that's a little immature, in my opinion, to not realize that your art is inherently political or be in denial about that. Regardless of, again, how he feels about this image, it is charged with today's politics or that yesterday's politics. Yeah, and then again in 38, he writes a letter to a friend. Politics is a matter of whose manifestation changes continually with the whims of the masses, just as coquettes manage to react according to the needs of the male and to transform and mask themselves. Well, if that's not plain and clear, what is? Note to self, don't hang out with people that really like Beckmann's writing. Painting, cool, we can hang out. But writing, I don't know. So yeah, this idea of the sexualized woman being a kind of like allegory for the German government at the time, or, you know, really just around this, what's happening in modernity here is an echo of modernity in France, modernity in England, modernity in the US. So like a lot of people are thinking this way. It's going to move across again. You're going to see this figure, you're going to see these ideas moving across in the museum. Let's place it at the Grieg Gallery where the Max Beckmann room is, right? That big room, and then stretch that all the way into the Contemporary Gallery, where by the time you get into the Contemporary Gallery, a lot of it is post 1960. So by then you're kind of entering into like, getting into like postmodernism. So that would be getting away from it. But like we had Pollock up there a while ago, stuff like that. Yeah, so yeah, this, I guess I went over his analogy here, but really I guess what I was hoping to do for you today, hopefully I've done this, is just present how objects can be, or art pieces can be, a product of the cultural environment that came out of. And again, not trying to say Max Beckmann's a big sexist, I would not go that far. I just think his work is perpetuating a narrative regardless. If you want to, we can do questions here. We can, a lot of these things I'm saying to you, there's a lot of debate around how you interpret these things. So you may not buy everything I said. I don't buy everything I read on this era. So feel free to jump in and really take me to task for it.
All right. Well, thank you. So we do actually have one question, and this came up kind of near the beginning of your talk. So, you know, you can comment on it as you will. But the question is modernity a byproduct of ethos or vice versa?
Of ethos?
Mm-hmm. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we can see the thing. So
yeah,
ethos,
I was looking at the ethos because I'm like, yeah, so. Oh, okay. I was trying to understand what you meant. I was like, was ethos a particular period beyond what I understood? Yeah, so if making sure we're saying the same thing here. So to help me re-understand what you're saying here. So when you say the spirit of ethos, do you mean that is modernity coming first and then the culture out of it and then culture then modernity?
I think that's the question. Yes.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought you were trying to say.
Yeah,
and
I think so.
The thing with these Q&As, it's just I can't talk to you directly about it, my friends. I'm so sorry whoever asked that question. So hopefully I'm not misinterpreting you. Like if it's coming out of the ethos, as you said, I would say modernity is concomitant with that. Like it's like these things are rising out at the same time. So it's kind of hard to chicken or the egg it in that way. And again, like it started in 1840, some people say, right? With this turn towards science. Some people would have had me say, instead of the way I started this, they would say it began, modernity is the death of God, you know, like instead of looking at divine like providence and thinking that God's going to, the goodness will prevail, God's vision will prevail. We're now looking at science, logic, and reason, and modernity is this forward arrow towards finding that perfect answer and becoming God ourselves. I don't know if that really answers what you're saying, but I guess things aren't that cut and dry. You can't claim a modernity from within it. That's what they say, even though I like kind of do that 20 times in this talk. Like, I feel like it's pretty clear that we're in a second modernism through the digital age. But you can't really talk about it until you're at least a couple of years out of it. So with that in mind, I can't really draw clear-cut lines on these things. It's like generational, you know?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see. So we've got, let me change that view there. So someone asked a question and then withdrew it, so I won't do that one. Someone is asking, so I guess if you could, since obviously your topic was modernism in all of its forms, so someone is asking kind of what was popular before modernism. So I guess kind of thinking of the opposite, like what was it
were they
working
reacting against?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so a lot of modernism in terms of the visual arts, they're reacting against like literal representations, or like that focus towards like, you know, pre-camera, like let's get the most detailed hyper-real Rembrandt kind of stuff. Like it's a turn away from technique in that sense to making art for art's sake. So like if you look at that Beckmann we were looking at, it's flat, it's like a Matisse in that way, it's kind of Fauvist, like it's not representational, it's an abstracted representation. And in that idea, like modernists would be like, that's almost more quote unquote real than real, man. Like,
right.
So yeah, they're reacting to that, like art as a way of depicting the reality in front of you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Oh goodness. All right. Let me read this. So, am I wrong to see there seems to be a dichotomy in the depiction of the women between this hyper-feminized, even hypersexualized for a time figure, for example, Marlene Dietrich in Lulu
Blue Angel, Lola,
yeah.
Known as, yeah.
And Louise Brooks as Lulu, or highlighting a more androgynous or even masculine aspect, like Anita Berber, etc. What accounts for the seemingly divergent depiction of women, and does this say anything about how gender was being viewed during this period?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think I would hope in some of my description, some answers are there already.
Yeah.
But it's a really tricky thing, right? Like, I wish there were some photos I could show you. There's one photo I really wanted to show you where Marlene Dietrich does her first, a US film where this is the first on-screen kiss, and she's in like a tuxedo, but like it's like also like a very form-fitting tuxedo. It's a very sexy tuxedo in terms of the gaze and like the visual gaze.
Yes.
But maybe for the lesbians out there too, I'm sure that was a big moment. But yeah, I think there's a fusion of the two, right? A lot, like this, like, you know, femme fatale that to conquer, or this man, or like this new version of a man that's woman that's going to replace you. So it's kind of like, depending on, someone might know both of those women, you know, they might know Berger and they might know Dietrich, or people like them, and have different attitudes towards both of them, but both of them have liberated sexualities, both of them are newly emancipated. So it's just different iterations of individuals being freed from the shackles of femininity in whatever way they, I don't want to say choose, that's like too utopic. And they have some space to choose.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So I think those are all the questions for the moment. Oh, and someone's just said, not a question, just a thank you for doing
Very
this.
sweet.
So thank
Thank you.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, I can end us with a question in the more general sense. So I would say, for you, Cait,
Yeah.
what are some other connections that you'd love to make, with artwork in the museum and with your other putting on your other hat as
Yeah.
film extraordinaire. So what are some other connections that you off the top of your head would love to explore more?
That's a great question. I think looking at those galleries again, if we step away from gender, the notion of movement in those galleries, like I'm thinking of the Kirchner circus piece, where you may remember it because it has like a man on a horse and it's like this like spiral behind him. It's very abstracted. For that spiraling signal being that, again, that kind of disorientation by spectacle, being stupefied by mass culture. But also, again, the camera came out of this time. It's a new art form. And so everyone's like, what's a camera other than a device to record? And the filmmakers, who were often artists, would be like, well, maybe we can actually do something with motions, like paintings that can move. And so then you start having these kinds of works. And then painters are like, well, wait, we can move too. So then you have like a lot of like competing motion.
Yeah.
It also just that motion can also be about the new mobility and moving through spaces in new ways. People are really thinking about moving in this time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably a big interest to me. Otherwise, that's the one that jumps out. But then you could always talk about like Impressionism and the works of Wong Kar-wai. If you're a fan of his work, he's very influenced by Monet.
Okay.
And that idea of time not being static and things moving in that way. You get that kind of visual repeats in his work. There's loads of stuff. I really hope to find a way to connect film into this, because film is, at this point, film's dead. Film's a print medium. Like, it's born in the digital age. Like, I still call them films, but they're not. They don't catch light the same way. They don't operate the same way. So
yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate this. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this with us today. And thanks to everyone who joined us today to listen in. This is actually our last Art Speaks of the year. So thank you, Cait, for being that for us. So please, I encourage everyone to be sure to check the website in the coming weeks for programs that are going to happen in 2022. So I think that's it. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.